So I don't have a bio sheet for Rachel, but this is Rachel Walton. She is an assistant professor in the library department. She decided that she wanted to collaborate with a couple of different colleges, thinking through this idea of the importance of oral history for college students. And so our class, several other classes at Rollins over the next 2 years, and then courses at Davidson and Southwestern University are participating. And so students from all those three campuses are going to be able to enjoy Dr. Poole's talk with us today. Some of them may participate with questions. Anything else?
You've got some cards in front of you. If you have questions throughout the talk, you can pass them up, or you can just ask them when we enter the question and answer portion. But otherwise, thanks for having us in your classroom. And also, I'm excited to see what you guys' projects have turned out this semester. It sounds like some really exciting people that you've gotten to meet and work with. So.
Okay, so it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Leslie Poole. She's an award-winning writer and historian, a fourth-generation Floridian. So she's long been interested in the role of women in the state's environmental movement and how they were saving the state's important natural resources even before they were able to vote. So we often think of voting as a way to engage civically, but even before they were allowed to, she looked at how they were engaging. Poole is an assistant professor of environmental studies here at Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida. She received her PhD in history from the University of Florida in 2012. Her articles have been published in a number of academic journals, and she regularly presents papers about her work at history conferences. Today she's going to talk to us a little bit about her background in journalism, her background in history, and how oral history has played an important role in the work that she does. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Poole.
Thanks for having me here today. It's fun to see everybody. Shout out to Davidson. My son went to Davidson. Go Steph Curry. Yay! How about that? I've got some notes here, and I'd really love for you guys to talk to me and ask me questions as we go along. I have a oral history, journalism interviews have been a part of my life since college. That's what my training was in. My bachelor's degree was in journalism. My master's degree was here in Rollins in Master of Liberal Studies. And then my PhD was at the University of Florida. And in all of those worlds, I did a lot of interviewing of people because, you know, you can go sit in a dusty archive and look at paperwork, but it's so much fun to go out and actually talk to people who were involved in the environmental movement or who, you know, were part of different projects that I've been doing research on. So if you can get them while they're alive, that to me, it brings the story to life. As a journalist, of course, that was part of my daily routine, was to go out and interview people, sometimes by telephone, sometimes in person, and sometimes it went really, really well, and sometimes it was really, really bad, and sometimes it was my fault, and sometimes it was their fault. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit about that and give you the wisdom that I have. For me, a lot of this is kind of intuitive, and I think for you, as you practice a lot of these different methods, you'll find that it becomes intuitive as well. All right? So we can all talk, chat, yes? All good? Awesome. Hey, come take an environmental studies class sometime with me, all right? Okay. So the first thing I want to say to you is in both of my fields, as a journalist and as a historian, it was always important to put in a lot of time before the actual interviews. I needed to know about my topic. I needed to know who I was going to talk to, what I wanted to ask them about, what their field of expertise was. So and it's become much easier now that you guys have access to the internet. But you know, to walk in cold to someone you have no idea who they are, that always was going to be bad. So I tried very hard to, and continue to know who I'm going to talk to and have an idea of the subject matter we're going to be covering, so I don't sound like a complete idiot. But it's okay to be a complete idiot, because sometimes when you don't know the answers, you're a better asker. Right, the right word. Anyway, you tend to ask the questions that maybe some people might gloss over, but you know, sometimes you want to get this certain amount of information from people, and sometimes it's okay to not know the topic. So I would start first though with preparing yourself. And sometimes it helps to also prepare the person you're going to talk to. Give them an idea of how you're going to be meeting. Make them feel comfortable. You know, we're going to meet in a certain place at a certain time. here's some sample questions I may be asking you, especially for oral histories. It really is helpful to have some sample questions so they can be thinking about it. Sometimes it makes them a better responder, better answerer when they are prepared and they've been thinking about some of the topics. One gentleman that I interviewed last year, I'm working on a project, the history of Biscayne National Park, and he was a former superintendent of the park, and so he had never done any kind of interview or talked about his days at the park, and he was a really critical employee right after Hurricane Andrew slammed through the middle of the park, so you can imagine what it did to the park, and so it was really important for me to get a good interview with him. Well, I turned on the tape recorder and we sat down, and 2 hours later he was finished talking to me. And he looked at me afterwards and said, you know, I guess I was ready to talk. So, but I had sent him some questions ahead of time for him to think about, and it had helped him get prepared and get his mind going along that way as well. All right, so in my journalism career, I covered everything from city hall to criminal courts to the police beat to agriculture. Yes, I have branded a cow in my background and picked oranges. I've been to death row and interviewed an inmate there. I have done a lot of different things in my background there, and I think that also helps you become a better interviewer. You learn to look at people and try to help them become comfortable. You help them to focus. Sometimes that's your job too, is to get them to focus on certain topics as well. And of course, as a working journalist, you have got a deadline that you've got to meet, and you've got information you need to gather. So, I knew sometimes I needed to get this information from this government employee. I needed, specifics. I needed to get it by this period of time, and I'm needing to fill some holes in the story that I'm working on. So that was some of my work as well. And then sometimes I was just going out with, like, one time I went with this cattleman out to watch the cattle auctions, and we just sat together and he was explaining to me how they worked. And so sometimes that's just kind of friend making too before I needed to use him later on as a source, and he was a great source after we've done that. All right, stop me when you want to ask a question. All right. So I was a working journalist for, is that a question or a
Yeah.
Okay.
So interviewing the person on death row.
Yeah?
You do like a lot of pre-interview stuff for that?
Well, I had read a lot of articles about this man.
Yeah.
He was on death row for shooting his estranged wife and her boyfriend. And we'll set this all up. Yeah. It was pretty bad. This is when Florida instituted the death penalty, and they assigned everybody at my newspaper somebody on death row that we had to go interview, just in case they ever got executed. So they assigned me this one guy who I had never heard of. So I read all the news articles about him before I went up there. I think I had talked to his attorney. I made the appointment, went up to Rayford, which is up north of Gainesville. I had to go through the whole metal detector, they go through your purse and all this stuff, and then they sat us in an interview room with this guard standing outside the door looking in. So it was not optimal interview areas, but he was so happy to have someone come see him like me. He just started talking. So I asked him specifics about the case and what was he hoping in appeals. Did he think he would, and he firmly believed he was going to be released someday. And he told me all about a woman he'd been writing with, and they were going to get married, and he had all figured out. And I'm thinking, I don't know, but let's let him tell his story, right? And then he points out to me Ted Bundy, who some of you may have heard of, a mass murderer, serial murderer actually, who's walking by and goes, hey, look, there's Ted Bundy. And I totally, kind of freaked out. And then we got back to this, he thought he was a celebrity too. Then we got back to the main story, and as we get to the end, I finally said to him, he'd been telling me he'd been drinking a lot that night, he'd blacked out, and he didn't really remember what happened with this crime that he's accused of. It was very, very brutal. And I finally said to him, so do you think you did it? Because, I don't know. I might have done it, but I don't think I did it. And at that point, I was ready to go home. But he was not in any illness, he was angry. Yeah. But he had a lot to say. He wanted to be heard. But it turned out to be a big story.
Listening to him? Not so much. He was just talking and talking.
He was talking and talking. But I directed him back to, back to the case. big head buddy. All right, now did you do it? Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So it's a little nerve-wracking, but sometimes when you're in the element and you know you've got to get it done, you don't think about, oh my gosh, I'm getting it done. Yeah.
Did he get executed?
He died before he got executed.
How old was he?
He was probably in his 60s when I interviewed him. And then I discovered that the woman was going to marry him, and then they broke up, and then I discovered about that, and he started writing to me. And I had another serial killer who used to write to me from death row, too. And, you know, yeah, this is criminal courts, baby. It's really exciting. But I was younger and blonder, you know. They thought they were meeting a cute young woman to talk to, you know. But, you know, I wasn't there to accuse. I was there to listen. That's really the key to that as well. Okay, all right. So I was in the journalism business for, I worked at 4 different newspapers if you count my summer internship. And then after I left the newspaper business, I went to work doing freelance writing for a lot of different publications, some national, some local. And then I found myself with a baby on my hip, and I went back to grad school and did a project in my master's program that involved doing oral histories with environmentalists about one major environmental crisis and project in Florida. And that was really fun. I took my tape recorder and I let these people talk, I think for the first time ever, about the project that they had been working on. It's been multiple years. It was it still is there, this dam that was built in North Florida on the Ocklawaha River. And it was part of a project, believe it or not, they were going to build a barge canal across the state of Florida to, like a big ditch across the state of Florida. And it was the first big grassroots movement in Florida, and it was one of the early ones in the United States that got stopped because the grassroots environmentalists put up a real fight. They gathered scientists together, they gathered facts, and they went to court, and they eventually got President Nixon to halt the canal, and about a third of it had been completed. So that was really an interesting story to me, and all these grassroots workers who really had never had their names hadn't really been much in the news. I went out and interviewed them for my project to talk about how the whole thing operated, and again, to let them tell their story. And so for that, I'm just talking now. You guys could always ask the questions. So for that, I prepared. I had read all the books I could find on the project. I had some general idea of what each person's role had been. And then, again, I let them know that I was coming. We found a quiet place to go because using a tape recorder, you got to be in a quiet place. Rule number 1, never interview someone at lunch, because all you hear on the tape recorder are silverware and waiters and glasses clanking and all. I learned that lesson right away. So we were in a quiet place and we sat down. Sometimes in their living room is always a great place because that's, home territory. And I interviewed them and let them tell me about their role in the project. Yes, ma'am.
So you mentioned this story about being with a death row facility, about interviewing people in their living rooms. And I think you're right, with qualitative research, it's often really nice to go into their natural environment. Are there any kinds of safety concerns or things that you do in preparation for an interview that you think it would be good for students to think about if they're doing this type of work?
Wow, I had never thought about that. I mean, on death row, they gave me a guard,
Yeah.
so that was never a problem. And they weren't in the situation they were going to kill somebody anyway. But, I always know where I'm going. Now y'all have GPS. I make sure I know exactly where I'm going and what neighborhood I'm going to be in. And sometimes we do neutral sites. I have interviewed people in libraries before, like in a small room. I've interviewed people actually in a hotel lobby before, not near the check-in desk. I hadn't really thought about that. Kind of as a working journalist, we don't really think about safety. We think about getting that story done. But that's a good point. I think you should be aware of your surroundings. Yes, sir.
You mentioned you have some internship in journalism, and what kind of jobs do you do in literature?
Oh my gosh, everything. Grunt work. I got to ghost a couple of reporters around on their jobs. I worked for the magazine compiling short stories, they would call briefs, events, things that are happening around town. They let me go out and interview people for feature stories, and then if I could think of something, I mean, if I could generate some stories on my own, then I could do that. I followed the dog catcher around for a couple of days, tried a story about dog catching, what that was like. And that's completely depressing. Completely depressing. They're collecting not healthy animals, that's really sad. To me, that's what I love journalism so much. And that's why I like teaching too. No 2 days are the same. It's kind of continuing education. You're constantly learning about new people or new circumstances or new topics. And so you have to really be on your game and get your research done. And you can't just walk in cold. TV people show up cold and say, hey, what's going on? Because they can just turn a camera on and people will answer a camera. It's amazing. But for a print journalist, you have to really be prepared. That makes your question?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, sir.
You said now that you work with the environmental studies department. Like, what made you change from journalism to
Well, the newspaper business is not in good shape right now. It's kind of falling apart. I loved journalism when I was in it, but when I was doing all my freelance writing, I actually interviewed quite a few professors here at Rollins about environmental topics locally. And then when they were looking for an adjunct to teach a class, they invited me to teach, and I just found a love for teaching. So I was teaching here for 5 years before I went back to get my PhD. They convinced me. You guys, the students, convinced me I should go back and get my PhD, so that's what I did. And I approached it when I walked in the door for my PhD. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I knew I was going to use my interview skills to oral histories to go along with the history of the environment in Florida as well. So that's kind of how all that happened. People tell me now, we were so smart to get out of the newspaper business when you did, but I honestly did it just out of passion for what I like doing. Journalism is a lot like teaching, don't you think? Informing people, getting the story right, telling it right away, getting it the most important facts at the beginning of it, and trying to engage people and caring about it. Yeah, that's the topic as well.
Can you talk a little bit about how you analyze the interviews, how you use the stories that you collect in your written work? The students have done their interviews for their oral history projects, and they're working in their teams to do some qualitative coding. So they're using kind of a social science perspective in analyzing the interviews. I wonder, as a historian, if there are different perspectives to analyze the interviews, or the journalist, if there's a different approach.
Well, I'm always taking notes while I interview people, always. Even if I have a tape recorder on, I'm taking notes when they said something I think is really important, and I try to also look at where the tape is, so I can go back and make a quick reference if I need to. I'm often looking for answers to questions that I think are really important, like, tell me about Hurricane Andrew hitting your national park. That's a big story, and that's something that was really critical to the research that I was doing. But I want them to tell it in their words, and so I don't know if it would need the same kind of data collection that y'all are doing, but I am looking for, the politician to admit they did something wrong. Well, that used to happen, not anymore, but or looking for the answer that I've been looking for, looking for someone to be maybe critical of something. But I'm keeping notes so that I know when they said something that springs. Of course, in journalism, I usually was writing on a deadline within a couple of hours. That was kind of how that operates. So your brain has to be organizing everything the whole time. With the oral histories for my other research, I have the luxury of letting the tape recording go on as long as the person wants to talk, and letting them tell me what they think is really important besides what I think is important. We were talking the other day, and I wanted to say to you guys, and I'll say to you now, the most important, one of the best questions I ever ask, and it pays off more often than not, is at the end of the interview, after I think I've got all the issues covered that I'm looking for, my last question almost always is, what have I not asked you today? What do I need to know? And it's amazing what you'll get out of that. Well, you've asked me about this, but you didn't ask me about this case, or something else is going on over here. Or I also ask, who else do I need to talk to? And that often has led me along a nice long path to finding other people who have good information as well. So even when you finish your list, let them, sometimes they will be able to tell you, the person you're talking to, here's somebody else you should talk to. And by the way, you didn't even ask me about this topic, and it really wasn't critical to something that's going on, and I had failed to discuss that. So that's always fun to do. It's interesting as a journalist, when you go to interview someone, they're usually already on guard when you get there because they're sure you're going to write a story about them. It might look bad on that to them. They might look bad. I'm not communicating well. They're worried about their image. They're worried about their jobs. Sometimes they're worried that they're going to say something wrong. So they're very much on guard. And so to calm them down, like I said, we ask some some preliminary questions. Tell me who you are, where you work, what's your background. Tell me about the subject. When I have enough time to do that. For oral history, though, it is amazing. I tell them I'm a historian. I'm here to hear your story. I turn the tape recorder on, and they usually have a ton to say. Things I think they would never have said to me as a journalist, they will say to me as a historian. And I don't know why that makes me less threatening, but it's fabulous for research. So that sometimes is how I approach it. And I usually approach to get everything on the record and the tape recording. And you guys know in Florida, you have to ask permission to record people, right? So we start by having them state their name, spell their name, never assume anything, give me their date of birth, where they went to college, where they grew up, what degrees they have, then what was your role in this subject or this event, and then have them start talking from there. That usually kind of sets the scene for where we're going. So they know I'm collecting data and I want to get it correct. Yes?
How often have you used, or do you use anonymity as like a tool in interviews? Is that really something that for the person that you're interviewing?
Yeah, I wasn't big on that as a journalist. Sometimes when I wanted some background and the person was not going to talk to me otherwise, I would, agree that we would go off the record. It had to be an agreement between both of us that we were going off the record. If they just said to me, now we're off the record, and I don't agree, that doesn't count, as far as I'm concerned. So if we agreed, and I had to decide if it was worth it to me to give up that, information. And sometimes it is, but I never quoted anonymous sources in an article, ever. Never. Because who knows if they're telling you the truth? If they're anonymous, they don't have to be held accountable. Kind of the way I look at it. Yes, sir.
You ever have anybody get mad at you after you publish something that you were in an interview with them?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, if you're not making people mad, you're not doing your work as a journalist, The worst was the old lady who called me because I'd written a story about her grandson getting, sentenced for rape. And she called me and just read me the riot act and screamed obscenities into the telephone. And I just said, thank you for calling. And I mean, that's part of your job. And if I've been inaccurate, I want to know that too. But usually it was just people who realized they had said things they probably shouldn't have, but they were usually truthful. Sure, that goes with it. And did all the thick skin. And that's why your editor is there too. Once they're mad, they're finished yelling at you, they can talk to your editor and then, vent that way. Yes, ma'am.
So what makes you think that people are giving you the truth? Because honestly, if I was sentenced for that and I knew that you were a writer, I would just totally ice my story, make me look like the good guy, make me look innocent. So
Sure. Well, I don't. So this is where you balance it with your research when you're writing the story. So you told me that you're innocent, you were never there, but I know I read the police reports, they got photos of you there. So I would probably report both of those.
just how do you know what to write out of that? Like, per se, they just gave you a bunch of fluff, and kind of like the backbone of the story. Like, how do you filter out what was said in the interview versus what you already know? And is that an actual article?
That is the tricky part. That's the hard part. So it depends on what your other sources are, what your other facts are. In journalism, very much often they want it balanced. They want both sides reported on, right? So you may tell me you're completely innocent, and then I may talk to a police officer who says, but I have photos of her. She was there. We've got blood on her and DNA evidence. So I I would present both sides of that. And, you know, when someone's going on trial for a case, you know, generally everybody assumes they're guilty. But, you know, the defense is going to come on eventually and tell another story. So it's your job to listen and not judge. It's kind of how I always operated along the lines. There's very little black and white in this world. It's mostly gray, and you got to kind of sift through it and figure out for yourself and make your best judgment and rely on those facts to hopefully back you, you know. Sometimes you'll be completely wrong. That just happens. Kind of the deal. Okay, let's see. Some notes here. Okay. Oh, another one of my rules is, I don't know if you watched a lot of TV, especially morning TV show interviews, where like the interviewer goes to ask a question and they talk for 5 minutes, and then the person answers yes or no. And you're like, but I've been waiting to hear them say this. So my rule is always try to say as little as possible. Let the person you're talking to do the talking. There's nothing crazier than again, you start watching these news shows and all, listen to the questions they ask, sometimes go on and on and on, whereas if they just said explain, then the answer might have gone on and on and on. And that's really, I try to keep myself, plus I don't like my voice on tape recorder. So I try to keep myself out of the tape recordings as much as possible and let it be their story. And think of questions like that, like, would you please explain that? Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And let them do the talking for you as well. Now, that doesn't mean when I catch somebody in a lie, I don't call them out on it. You know, I'll point out, hey, you know, so the record says this. What do you mean? You know, explain that to me. Why is there a discrepancy as well?
Would you say that, like, interviewers in these morning shows, the reason they ask like super long questions just to get like a simple answer is they kind of have like an idea of what they want to be portraying. So they just,
I think they like being on camera and they like talking on camera, but I think, yeah, they are they know the answer that they're looking for, right? I mean, even the celebrity interviews are like that too. They don't let the celebrities talk, they do all the talking, like, you know, J-Lo, you've been married 5 times, and we've seen you do this, and you've been married, and what about Finn, and blah, 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 and they go on and on and on, and J-Lo finally says, she goes, I'm not talking about that, you know, or something like that, and they've lost their opportunity, whereas if they just said, talk to us about marriage, or whatever, it's bad, sorry. But, you know what I mean, if they had done that, and then they might have gotten a much more interesting interview out of it than when they do all the talking. So that's something to be careful about. A lot of people like to hear themselves talk. I think a good interviewer does not like to hear themselves talk. I scream at the TV all the time. My husband's tired of hearing me say that as well. Another one of my rules is if someone says something to you, and you don't really understand what they just said, don't go on to the next question. I make them clarify for me, or give me an anecdote and explain that to me, especially if it's something very technical or scientific. When I was doing some environmental writing for the Orlando Sentinel, I had a few experts that I could go to explain technical things to me. Like I was doing a story about a hazardous waste dump, and so there was a gentleman with the local water, the environmental water management group, that I could call him and go back over things and make sure I understood the topic. But also when an expert is talking to you, stop them and say, wait a minute, I'm not sure I understand that. Can you explain it to me again? And make sure that you understand it. Otherwise, when you report it back, you may have it wrong. You don't want that to happen. So, and people don't mind explaining things, or I will say, can you give me an example sometimes? You know, when you may think, give me an example. And I think sometimes that's great. I mean, I've been looking at one of your books, and I think examples are good, or putting it into a fictional situation. Here's what we're talking about, you know, learning to be a listener, those kinds of things as well. So I always assume that I don't know what I'm doing and that they're going to help me. It also helps sometimes in long interviews to kind of follow things chronologically, especially for history interviews. You know, start at the beginning. When did you get this job? When did this happen? You know, kind of follow it. What are you doing now toward the end? That kind of thing. It kind of keeps things in order, like I said, especially from a history point of view. And sometimes that works in a news point of view as well. I mentioned taking notes. I have, I try to stay as neutral as possible, but I do nod along as people are talking to me, and I smile when they tell me a funny story, and I've cried before when I had one woman tell me this terribly sad story about her son dying, and I couldn't help it. We ended up holding hands crying. I mean, it was a sad story, but it was spontaneous, and I wasn't doing it to be on camera or anything like that, but sometimes some empathy with your person you're talking to, depending on the topic. I was not going to hold the guy on death row's hand. That was not going to happen. But, some people, when they're talking about the death of their child, maybe at the hands of a serial killer, that's something that I follow my intuition. They have to feel comfortable, and they have to be really comfortable, because they have just, imagine that, opening up their soul to you. And I think that deserves some empathy. Yes, sir.
But what happens if you're admitted to start crying with any subject you continue to live with?
I usually stop the tape recorder and just wait until sometimes they pull it together, A lot of times people, it's really amazing. I would go talk to the families of murder victims more often than I wanted to, and I was always nervous about it. It just felt so intrusive, but it's what was called for with the talk. And it was amazing how many people wanted to talk to you. They wanted you to know about this person. And sometimes they would get very upset, and we would just wait, and they would sometimes just pull together, take some deep breaths. I usually sometimes recommend that. Take a couple deep breaths, it's okay. And then they wanted to continue on, because they wanted to say what a good person this was, how important they were to them. So it's really, I hated doing that, but sometimes, families want to say that, and they want that to be in the story. So yeah, it's hard. I guess you're a little bit of a psychologist, not necessarily in that, but you kind of learn from people and body language and all that kind of stuff. Let's see. And again, I pay attention, let them know that they're the most important thing in the room. I am, no distractions, no telephones going off, no computer on. I got nowhere to go. I'm not going to be, looking at my watch ever. I never even wear a watch, so that I don't want anyone to feel hurried up about anything at all. Although there were times in the newspaper business where I really needed to go, but that's where you want to wait and get that last question. Is what else do I need to know? If you don't get to that, then you may miss something important there as well. So.
Leslie, is there ever a situation where you would want to give someone interview questions in advance, or is it always really your intent to have their gut reaction to the question?
Well, in journalism, you wanted to know the topic you were coming in for, in case they needed to pull numbers or statistics or some kind of data for you. But I never always told them if I was coming into, if it was an investigative piece, I didn't always tell them exactly what I was looking for, but just the general area. For oral history, I do give specific questions so that they can consider them ahead of time. What do you think was your best accomplishment? What was your biggest failure? What are you most proud of? What are some of how do you think about, this topic? And then that gets people thinking, and sometimes if it's an event that's happened years and years in the past, it gets them thinking about something that they hadn't really considered in a while. And sometimes they will go through their old records and bring me photos and things that they hadn't really thought about, and that always adds to the interview as well. They bring in their memorabilia again as well. Are you guys interviewing people for your projects? Is that what you're doing? Yeah? Have you done a lot of that in the past, or is this kind of a first time? Yeah? Okay. It's hard, isn't it, at first? I was a terrible introvert, believe it or not, when I went into journalism school. But, that editor breathing down your neck or that professor screaming at you got you out there and got you to go out. It forced me out. And then the more I did it, I really liked people, and I really liked to hear their stories. And so I really enjoyed it. So I had never expected to be actually standing in front of groups ever, or talking or teaching a class ever. That was something that kind of came along the way. So I've enjoyed it. But it's hard to get used to. But once you've done it a few times and find the positives in it. Look, I'm meeting a new person, can hear a new perspective. Everybody to me is so interesting. I've never met a person who wasn't interesting or who didn't have a great story to tell. It's your job to find what that story is. pull it out of them. And sometimes it just takes some experience getting there and learning how to ask the right questions or ask the open questions. So. Yes.
Have you found that, so in this class we talk a little bit about how oral history or interviewing skills are super important for a variety of professions, but can also be really helpful in terms of our personal relationships. Have you found as a professor, maybe with your invitees or in relationships with students that you use, or family or whoever, that you use some similar interviewing strategies when you're trying to manage a difficult situation?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Asking questions, rather than giving my opinion ahead of time, asking questions, inviting a student into my office and who's got a problem, ask them to sit down, take a deep breath, tell me what's going on here, tell me where you want to be, let's work this out together, but listening to them first, tell me, because sometimes what they think they're upset about, the paper, the grade they got on that paper, what they're really upset about is that they are on a crunch for a deadline for another class, and they're really, things are coming down on them, raining down on them that they hadn't expected. So that helps as well. Active listening to someone who's in stress or grieving, asking the question, letting them talk is really, I think, the best way to deal with it. Who knows what to say to someone who's just lost a member of their family? Just by opening the door a little bit, tell me how you feel, all kinds of things can happen. And it's good for them, and it gives you a way to respond when you feel awkward or out of place as well. I'm kind of a big questioner now. I think I've told everybody I've turned into my mother, who could talk to anybody, and we go to the grocery store, and for God's sake, we could do 2 hours because she could talk to anybody in any aisle about anything, and I've sort of become that in my legal life. I'm an information gatherer. I want to make a decision based on lots of information. I ask people all the time, advice on what's the best book you've read lately, or what's your favorite restaurant to go to, and it's amazing the information I can get, and good information that I can get in that way too. So I think being a good listener can transcend a lot of, not just occupations, but in your daily life as well. Talking to my kids, what's going on? Why are you so stressed? And not guessing why, letting them tell me what's going on. So, but not my son who went to Davidson, who's a good kid. So that's been a real blessing too, I think, as well. So. Okay, let's see what else I want to say here. I think also part of it is important is to kind of acknowledge what the person is telling you is important. Yes, this is an important event that you're telling me about. I'm really glad you're telling it to me. Help me put it in perspective. Your feelings are important. The information you're giving me is important. I wouldn't be here if I didn't think you had information that I needed or would like to hear as well. For my oral interviews, I tell them that what's been happening is all the interviews I did for my PhD and that now I'm doing for my park project are all going to go into the public record, that they'll be available as digital recordings for future generations or future researchers to come and listen to. They'll be, this is the beauty. You can go online and click and listen to that person tell you about their life. And so I tell them, you're part of history. It's going to be collected going into the future. So I want them to know that that's really important and that their words will be what's remembered, not what I have to say about them. And it'll be there. So that I think sometimes that makes them tell some stories that they might not otherwise have told. I had a couple of people say, well, I've been gone long enough now. I think I'm going to say exactly what I think about this job. And they tell you exactly what they think about that job. And they wouldn't have done it if they were still in that job, right? So that's been really interesting too. As well. Maybe I'll have some difficult people you've had to deal with on your interviews. No?
That's partially their assignment for next week. So next week you're writing your blog post about challenges or surprises or different things that came up in your interview experience. Anybody want to test your ideas before you write your blog? See what Dr. Poole thinks? And maybe she can help us imagine ways that we might deal with challenges.
I guess like the biggest thing for me was like before the interview, the guy who I was interviewing didn't quite know exactly what I was going to like interview him about, so I kind of left it in the last year, like right before the interview. Okay, this has to do with your job and listening and how it applies to your job. So at first it was like, okay, what's this about? And that was my main problem.
Okay, so maybe if you'd given him a little bit more notice ahead of time, do you think that would have helped to get him ready to talk? Or maybe if you told him what you were going to use it for too, that you know it's not going to be something you can use. Right? I'm not going to use this to embarrass you in any way. That would help as well. Yeah. Okay.
I think for me, my interview subject, he told me that like 4 or 5 interviews a week this year. So I think he already had like a kind of already knew almost all the questions I was gonna have to be like kind of prepared. And I think he just kind of remember everything. He just kind of, you know. And I don't think he's really saying much of what I was asked about listening, because I was asking questions about listening, and I don't think he elaborated much on listening here. He was just saying stuff he already knew from other interviews.
Okay, so kind of like he had a routine speech already set. So it's like asking a politician or a president right now to say something new.
Yeah, he was actually the director of communications for the Navy, so he was super involved with things.
Okay, so he's been rehearsing
Mm-hmm.
what he's going to say. So the hard part of that is to get somebody to say something spontaneous, right, and thoughtful. Well, interesting. So let's see. I think I would maybe pull out that question. What have I not talked to you about? You know.
I asked in the end, and he said, you know, apart from listening questions, I didn't ask everything 5 times a week, so getting you what to expect.
So maybe, you know, taking him to a different setting might have helped. Let's go for a walk in the park.
For the phone interview.
Oh, it was a fun interview. Okay.
So,
Well,
yeah,
you're kind of stuck with that one, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, sometimes they're going to turn out that way, but so we can move them to a different location. Like, what's your favorite place to go? As long as it's not too noisy and useful, take some notes. You know, that helps as well. Or promise them, I don't know, ice cream or food after, you know, but after you get to your point as well, that helps sometimes. You know. Sometimes some more interesting stories I've ever heard is out on hikes in the woods. People will tell you all kinds of things because they're actually sometimes people tell you great stuff when there's no eye contact at all, which is really interesting. But you know that you've got to judge that on your own with how people operate and if you're comfortable telling you. I know my students will write me papers and tell me all kinds of very personal things in their papers, and I think they feel safe that I'm not going to share it with anybody, and there's no eye contact. You don't have to tell me that story, but they'll write it in the paper. So that I find really interesting too. So, yeah, and that might be another thing too, is that sometimes to follow up an interview, I always get out my card, my contact information, and I say, you know, if you think of something else, call me or send me an email. And I will sometimes get enormously long emails from people who will say, you know, we didn't talk about this, so here's what I think about it. And I'll have just like 2 or 3 pages of an email from people who think of something, I didn't think of this, we should have talked about this. And that's another good way to get follow-up information as well. That's not you listening to them, but that's them talking to you. So that's another method as well. So, or they'll send me web pages. You need to go look at this, or you need to, here are some other things I want you to see. That might help. And sometimes they're very helpful along those lines. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about my history experiences. I was, as your professor mentioned, my research has been about women in the environmental movement in Florida. And so part of my project was to go out and interview women environmentalists in Florida who had been part of different environmental efforts around the state. And it ended up with me traveling all over the state to go find women who mostly had never been interviewed before, who'd never been asked about their work, and who found it rather amusing, you know, that someone had finally shown up to talk to them, which was great, because then they were ready to talk to me. And I sat in people's, again, living rooms and hotel lobbies and offices, and a few were by telephone. Those are a little bit harder, I think, but they were, they were really excited to have this opportunity to talk. And all of them had been working in different projects, so I had to do a lot of research on this before I got there. Yes.
Have you run into any sort of difficulties, and if you did, how you overcame them, into setting up interviews with people who are really busy or it's difficult to get to or get in contact with?
Yes. There were a few people on my target list, even for my PhD, working over many years that I still never could get an interview out of. And I finally just had to say, it's not going to happen. In journalism, the threat to them always is, if you don't talk to me, if you don't call me back. And I would always let them know what my deadline was. Here's when we need to talk. And that might work for you too. Look, this is what my papers do. I've got to talk to you by this time. Otherwise, I'm going to have to say, you can let me know. Do you want to call it no comment or that you can't be reached? And you'll see that now. If you read a lot of journalism stories, a lot of times they will say, the person couldn't be reached. And sometimes that just means they're just not calling you back. So yeah, that does happen. That's very frustrating. Because you want them to give them an opportunity to give their point of view. But if they don't want to give it, you can't force it out of them. I've never wrestled anybody down to the ground in response, but I really wanted to. It's not big enough, So yeah, that can be really frustrating. And it can be really frustrating when they are lying through their teeth to you too. And that happened a lot, You've done the research, you know what the background is in the story, and then they completely deny all of it, and you're just thinking, okay, whatever you want to say, but I know you're lying through your teeth to me, and that you've got to report what they said. You've got to use their words, but you're not, again, you're not there to judge so much. You're there to try to gather information. And you have to smile. That's the worst way. You have to smile when they're lying to you and be polite. At least you used to have to be anyway. Any other questions or thoughts? Are y'all doing oral history projects too, or are these just right now written projects?
They're using the oral history interviews for a written project.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, so they did individual interviews, and they teamed up based on similarities of the professionals that they interviewed. They did some coding last week. They're thinking about the challenges and the successes for next week. And they will write up their findings and present them during the final exam period in a couple of weeks.
So let me ask you, did you ever have anybody, and this has happened to me, who sat and stared at the tape recorder the whole time? They didn't even look at you. I had a few who just kind of leaned over the tape recorder and just started talking into it, and I never even got any eye contact out of it. It's like they knew they wanted to say and they wanted to get it out really fast. That's kind of challenging. It's hard to get the interaction going there. But usually once they say whatever it is that was really, really important to them, then they relax and then we'll talk. It helps to talk about your pet. If they have a dog, and you see a picture of a dog on their table. I have a friend of mine who totally diffused the problem. She went to interview a guy in his office and just happened to notice that he had a Florida Gator knickknack or whatever on his back shelf. And the first thing she said to him was, "Oh, hey, I'm at the University of Florida too, go Gators." And they got this whole Gator conversation, which I know is a sickness, but it totally diffused him being so uptight, and worried about her coming there. And then they proceeded to have a wonderful interview, a wonderful conversation, and she wasn't a Gator at all. But but it works. I mean, take a look around their office, see if they're displaying. Look at what the pictures are on the wall. Look at where they went to college. Sometimes you'll see their diplomas hanging on the wall. That's another good thing. Maybe they have some little silly things on their desk. Vacation photos. That's another way also to get maybe calm people down and find some things of mutual interest. Hey, I've been to Yosemite too. Wasn't that great? If you see a picture of that along those lines too. Helps too.
Can you say just a couple more words about phone interviews? So a couple of the students opted to do phone interviews because their people lived a little bit further away. What do you think the value of a phone interview versus a face-to-face interview is? What are we giving up in a phone interview?
I hate phone interviews, and I'll tell you why. Partly it's because it's hard for me to stay focused. I'm usually watching the person and you know, taking signals from their language and all, but on a phone interview, you don't get any of that. And I tend to, I can get really distracted. My computer's there, my phone is buzzing, you know, that's really hard. So I've gotten to where I go, if I have to do this for this current history project that I'm working on, I go to my husband's office to his conference room that has nothing in it. It's a phone and me. And in that way, I don't get distracted, because it's much easier, I think, to follow someone when they're sitting in front of you and you're listening to them than if they have kind of a droney kind of voice too. You know, it's easy to start thinking about all the things I need to do, and then sometimes you may miss something important that they said to you. But that said, sometimes that's the only way to reach somebody too. And in that way, so then I have to sit and stare at the tape recorder, at the phone, and make sure I'm staying really, really focused on what's going on, so that I can, because now all you've really got are vocal signals, right? You can tell when someone's excited or upset or sad. I mean, I interviewed one gentleman for over an hour by telephone, and he was fabulous. He was fabulous, but he was in like Wisconsin, so that we were never going to get together, you know, for that. So there's some value to it. I don't think it's as friendly. I don't think you get some of the funny anecdotes so much with them, you know. People will say, oh, by the way, did I ever tell you this funny story? You get a lot of that just because you're interacting and you're nodding and everybody's smiling, you know, and then they know you're not a threat, but you just don't get done as often in an interview. So that's where having a lot of research done too. So at least you know, well, tell me about this event too. Kind of lose that kind of spontaneity, I think. Is that what happened to you? Do you think of this guy, or he just was going to tell you whatever? He was going to tell you, city guy.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, he's just going to tell you whatever he's going to tell you anyway.
yeah, I think he was ready for all the questions. And also, he was a really busy guy. So he was on the metro. So also, I can hear the metro. And you asked him a few questions like 3 times, 2 times. And wasn't the best interview. But
So one of my strangest interviews that I did in my PhD is, again, you know, I was interviewing women. So like the premier woman in the environmental movement from Florida in the 20th century was Carol Browner, who was from Miami, who went to DC and ran the EPA in the Clinton and Obama administrations. I mean, that's like the biggest environmental bureaucracy in the world. And here she is, starting out in Miami, worked her way up to state government, she's an attorney, and it took me forever to get an interview set up with her. And they told me I could have 15 minutes. That was it. It was going to be a telephone interview. That was all I was going to get. And I was like, ugh, but at least I can say I talked to her, I tried. So I get her on the phone, and it's clear she's driving around in her car. And then the signal interrupts, and the next thing I know, she calls me back. She's in the middle of a train of thought, and she's starting to enjoy the questions. I think she's less suspicious of me now. Now she knows what we're talking about. I'm understanding what she wants. The next thing I know, I realized she's in Starbucks ordering a coffee, but she's talking to me. I mean, we're talking all the way through the order, and she's talking to me again, and then she's back in her car, and the interview continues. And so I actually ended up getting about almost, I think, 40 minutes of interviews out of her, but the phone cut out twice. She called me back, and clearly we were running errands together. But I got to ask her some questions I really wanted to talk to her about, because she's such a iconic figure. It's really how I end the book, with her running the EPA. And so that was really important to me too, because sometimes strange things like that happen. And you know, you gotta go with the flow. You gotta be flexible, right? They hang up on you. Sometimes it's not that they hate you, it's because, you know, waste basket's on fire and they've got to take care of something immediately. But make sure they have your information too, so that they can get back in touch with you if they think of something else, or your email, that they can send you an email if they think of something else. So, I mean, after that interview, Browner let me use a photo. She sent me a photo to use for the book. She gave me all kinds of permission and stuff, so it worked out really great. But I think at first she just thought, you know, it's going to be a quick interview. I talked plenty of people over here, so that turned out great. Not would have been great to have in the room, but you know, that's how that went as well.
Do any of you guys do Skype interviews or like Google Hangout or something like that? Like, what have you guys done?
Well, no, I've done a Skype interview before, but not for this project.
Yeah. To me, that would be a different dynamic.
It's hard.
And then you can feel like the dog running around in the background or something. Similar situation.
Yeah, I haven't done the Skype thing yet. That's not technology. I'm history. So I need to learn it, though. I know that that's important.
I think it's happening more and more for employers now who want to do Skype interviews, and that is something so important. I did a phone conference with Syed in IT, and I didn't think about it, but yeah, my dog ran across the couch behind me as I was doing this call. Of course, it was with a colleague who didn't find it too terrible, right? If that had been a job interview, and I hadn't thought about it, I don't know if they would have been as appreciative of my adorable dog running across the back of the couch.
Unless they're dog lovers, you never know.
In which case, maybe that would get you the job, right? So I think there's a lot of things that Skype or technology introduces into the interview environment that we're not as mindful of yet that we may need to be if we start to use this technology.
Sure, you don't always think about where to set it up, what to have, or not have in the background, or what. Yeah, that's Then you always have the garbage truck drive by or something, inevitably too. So weird things can happen. So you got to stay loose. That's the other thing I was going to say. You got to stay loose. You got to stay flexible because really weird stuff can happen along the way. Like Ted Bundy can walk by and totally disrupt the whole interview, or a siren can come by and now you can't hear what's going on, right? Or the guy's on the metro and you can't, and break up, the phone stop. I mean, all this great technology can still, weird things can still happen. So, and you gotta have a sense of humor about it, and it's life. Life is messy. Yes, sir.
Was the woman interviewing environmental duties was your choice to do the researcher?
Yes.
Why only women and not women and men?
Well, because if you pick up a history book about Florida, there's usually all men. And honestly,
there's not women.
Women get no credit at all. And I knew this from my newspaper days, is every time I went out to an environmental event or writing an environmental story, there was always a ton of women, but when you read the newspaper articles and you read the histories, there were never any women mentioned. And it was usually because men were the head of the organizations. And so nobody paid attention much. They're the ones who were the speakers or were interviewed. Nobody paid attention to all the women that are there. And so that to me was kind of an interesting topic. I wanted to look at what was the role of women. And I really didn't, I knew they were involved, but I didn't really know how rich the story was going to be. Because here's what usually happens, as some people say, men lead, women organize. So men are the presidents and maybe the chairman of the boards of the organizations, but women are the treasurers and secretaries and publicity people, and they're writing the pamphlets, and they're going out to the schools, and they're doing the public speaking, and they're collecting the petitions. They're sitting at the farmers market handing out information. But that's not glamorous, sort of, but it's integral to any kind of environmental effort. Women have to be there. They're really important workers. And also the interesting thing I discovered, and I really thought it was going to be a stereotype, so I tried to stay away from it, is the fact that women didn't really care if their names were used or they got any glory at all. They cared that something changed. So they didn't care if they were the president of Audubon, but they cared that the laws went into effect that protected the birds. They cared that the birds got taken care of, but they didn't have to be the president. They didn't have to have their name put on the name of a legislative act. They didn't have to have their name on a building. They didn't really care about that. So that was kind of to me, that was interesting. And it wasn't just about women. I'm really interested in grassroots. So how do people who are theoretically powerless get things done? And that's really, before women get the vote in 1920, and even through the entire 20th century, women in Florida are not running the legislature, right? The legislature is still largely male. Businesses are still largely male. Women are still making 76 cents on the dollar, right? We still have not achieved real equality, but still, women in a lot of these environmental efforts got a lot of things done. They did petitions. They went to Tallahassee and hounded people. One of my favorite quotes I found was from a woman who'd been married to the president of Rollins College. Her name's Lucy Blackman. And she wrote an account of women going to Tallahassee to ask for bird protection laws well before 1920. And she said that the women used what she called sand spur tactics. That they stuck onto these male legislators. They wouldn't leave them alone until they got their issues taken care of in the legislature. And the male legislators quickly learned the women weren't going away. So they might as well go ahead and attend to their issues first so that the women would go home. Because they were tenacious and they were not going to give up on their topics. So that's what was interesting to me. And I barely scratched the surface. I started looking at what women's clubs were doing and garden clubs that we think of as just kind of nice little social groups. But in the early 1900s, they were kick-ass activists. They were doing petitions, and they had committees on all kinds of important environmental issues, and they were the ones out there planting trees. The Winter Park Women's Club, some of you may walk by it every day coming across the street. That's the white building across from the arch. They're the ones that petitioned the city of Winter Park for garbage collection, for zoning laws, to make the city have a tree ordinance, to have a bird sanctuary. It's the women who are thinking about these things, while the men are busy being mayor and the city commissioner. So I've just found that really interesting. And so I went in with this idea. When I started doing the research, it started to pay off. Otherwise, I would have had to change topics, clearly. But that's where all that came from. I was from interviewing people, from talking to them and seeing what was happening, the feet on the street sort of thing. So that's kind of where all that started. Yes, ma'am.
Is there anything you notice specifically as a female journalist?
Sometimes I think you have access. You don't have access first because you're female. Sometimes you have more access. There was a great exhibition. It may still be on right now at the Orlando Museum of Art, and it's called The Women Photographers of National Geographic. If you guys haven't seen it, it's really awesome. And what you can see is that sometimes women can cover topics that men can't, or they have an interest that men might not have. So for this example, they looked at child brides. There was a whole photo exhibition of girls who've been child brides, and women's abuse or lack of rights, that sort of thing. That I'm not sure men would have access to those stories, behind the scenes in Iran, things like that. But other times I think you're kind of left out, at least back when I was a journalist a few decades ago, you couldn't go in the all-male clubs, right? You couldn't, it was easy to be ignored or put down, or I was told more than once that I didn't look old enough to be a real journalist, things like that. So you just kind of power through and have to prove yourself as well. So did that happen to you with your project, or?
Not specifically my project, but I do a lot of interviews because I was like, I do a lot of things. So I might notice like I'm interviewing people of like significant position, taking it maybe a little more seriously if they're a woman person, and some little things like that.
Yeah, things like that happen. And sometimes in some of my interviews, since I was mostly talking to women environmentalists, they would really open up. Like, okay, the time I cried, this woman was telling me that her son is the one that told her she needed to really do some work to protect this river, and then he died 2 months later. So she told me, so now I do it for him. And then she cried. I don't know that a male reporter would have gotten that story, or even asked those questions. So there is a difference, but sometimes, I consider it always working my advantage. But the downside of that is that you've got to be super prepared for those people who don't take you seriously, right? Yeah, it's not fair, but it's what it is for now. So. Yes, ma'am.
Just out of interest, have you ever interviewed anyone involved in the Disney water restoration?
Oh yeah, I paddled it.
I just went to the class Friday. That's why.
Oh, with Emily?
Yeah.
With her class? Yeah, isn't that fabulous?
Yeah, it was really interesting.
So that's a really interesting story for y'all who are not familiar with it. I'm going to make it really short. In the early 20th century, all swamps were seen as bad. All standing water was seen as bad. Everglades were bad. They're wastelands. They're bad. And one of the places that gets looked at is the Kissimmee River, which is south of here, and it's a twisty, windy, serpentine kind of river. But in doing it has a lot of wetlands and shallow areas and lots of wildlife habitat. Beautiful, beautiful. But it just didn't drain the area fast enough when there was a big rainstorm. And you guys what the rain looked like here, right? So they turned it literally into a canal. The Army Corps of Engineers came in and turned it into a great big huge ditch so that it could run the water off really fast and take it straight down to Lake Okeechobee. And it did a great job of draining the land, but immediately the locals realized that it had destroyed this incredible habitat. So what they've done is they've been doing some restoration work to remake it serpentine again, and it automatically came back. The plants came back, the birds came back. It's a really great story. So it starts with a bunch of sportsmen down in Kissimmee who see that this is a huge blunder and needs to be repaired almost immediately. So that's a great story. Lucky you. I went down there when it first got, the early part got restored and paddled around. That's great.
Is it like fully back up and often?
The river?
Yeah.
It will never be completely back because they put too many floodgates and structures onto it, water control structures. But at least a 10-mile section of it now is back to being serpentine and shallow, and the birds came back. So it's what a horrible thing they did. Oh, yay, restoration. We can fix some of the damage that we've done. Like that dam I told you about in North Florida. It needs to come down. It does. And the woman was head of that. That's a great story, actually. Marjorie Harris Carr, who led a group called the Florida Defenders of the Environment, who I interviewed for my master's degree and had died by the time I was working on my PhD. So I used my old interviews with her. And she was working to stop the barge canal and then to get rid of the dam that had been built during a period of time. But she had her master's degree in zoology, but she would go to hearings and they would call her Mrs. Carr. Mrs. Carr, surely, blah, blah, blah. We're doing all this. We're doing our best work. And she would stand up and just kind of tear them to pieces because she knew her science. She knew her facts. And, she wasn't just this little old lady, to be ignored. And the news media wrote her up as the Micanopy housewife versus the Army Corps of Engineers. All the time they talked about her as being this local little housewife who was fighting this federal project, when in fact she was much more than that. But the media loved to play that story. And you know what? She went along with it. If she could get a news article about and to her side of the canal issue, she didn't really much care how she was portrayed. And a thick skin, right? Thick skin and a curious mind, always helpful. All right. Any more questions?
I think we are pretty tight on time, but I would just like to say thank you to Leslie for coming out and talking to us about her work and also helping us figure out how to do our oral history and interview work better. So
I hope it helps.